It was a crisp autumn in upstate New York, the kind of air that held the promise of wood smoke and apple cider, but still carried a whisper of the summer just past. I recall it clearly because I was out in the garden, snipping off the last of the faded hydrangeas, their once vibrant blooms now brittle with the coming cold. The phone rang, a familiar chime that always managed to cut through the quiet of my days. It was Michael, my son. His voice, usually a hearty rumble, was softer than usual, almost measured. "Hi, Mom. How are you doing?" It had been nearly a month since I'd last heard from him, a stretch that had become more common since he married Eleanor. Our calls had dwindled, becoming shorter, more polite exchanges that felt as thin as the late season leaves. I told him I was fine, keeping myself busy with the garden and finally sorting through some of Arthur's things. That last part wasn't entirely honest. Arthur's closet remained untouched since the funeral. The scent of his old tweed jacket still brought a lump to my throat and a sting to my eyes. But Michael didn't need to know that. "You've been on your own for a while now," he said, a slight hesitation in his tone. "Eleanor and I were talking, and well, we don't like the idea of you rattling around in that big old house all by yourself." I gave a small, nervous chuckle. "I've managed, dear. It's quiet, but it's home." Then came that pause, that little hitch in his voice that always signaled a well-rehearsed proposition. "We were thinking, maybe you should come live with us for a bit." My heart gave a little jump, a flutter of unexpected emotion. "Live with you?" "Yeah, Mom, I mean, it would be good for the grandkids, Emily and young Thomas. They miss you. And we've got that spare room, you know? You wouldn't be in the way." I didn't answer right away. Something about it felt off. Not necessarily bad, just unexpected. The last time I'd visited, Eleanor had barely strung 2 sentences together with me. She was always busy, always on her phone, always flitting off somewhere else. And Michael, he'd looked tired even then, thinner than usual, with shadows under his eyes like he hadn't slept soundly in days. But the thought of being closer to my grandchildren, those 2 bright sparks in my life, stirred something deep within me. Perhaps I was being foolish, letting my loneliness speak louder than my better judgment. "I'll think about it, Michael," I said finally. And I did. For a full week, I sat with the thought, turning it over and over in my mind like a smooth stone. I walked through my empty house, past the faded family photos gathering dust on the mantelpiece, Arthur's old armchair where he used to take his afternoon naps, the delicate teacups I hadn't used in months. I thought about the quiet evenings, making dinner for one, leaving the television on just to hear another voice in the room. And then, I made my decision. I packed a suitcase, not everything, just enough for an extended stay. I left my house as I always found it. Quiet, a little sad perhaps, but still standing, still mine. The drive down to Michael's place, a couple of towns over, felt heavy with both apprehension and a fragile hope. When I pulled into their driveway, no one came out to greet me. Eleanor finally opened the door after my second knock. She didn't smile. "You're early," she said, stepping aside just enough for me to squeeze through with my suitcase. The house smelled faintly of takeout and diapers. Toys were scattered across the worn rug in the living room, and a cartoon I didn't recognize blared from the television. Michael came down the stairs, young Thomas perched on his hip, a damp patch on his shoulder. He gave me a quick hug, too quick. Emily and Thomas barely looked up from their building blocks. He gestured vaguely towards the hallway. "We cleared out the guest room for you. It's not perfect, but it's something." I stepped inside. It hadn't been cleared out at all. Boxes overflowed in every corner, a broken lamp lay on its side near the window, and an air mattress sagged in the middle of the floor. There was no closet space, no place for my things. I managed a weak smile. "It'll do," I said softly. The first night, I lay on that air mattress, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of a house where I didn't quite belong. I told myself it was temporary, that I was needed, that this was what family did for each other. But a nagging feeling persisted, a sense that I had walked into something that had less to do with my being alone and everything to do with them needing something from me. I didn't know it then, but I had just stepped into a slow, quiet kind of betrayal, the kind that doesn't shatter you all at once, but chips away, day by day, until there's nothing left to give. The days that followed were filled with small silences and subtle dismissals. I tried to be helpful, offered to cook, to clean, to watch the children while Eleanor scrolled endlessly on her phone or disappeared upstairs for hours on end. But nothing I did seemed to land right. Eleanor barely looked at me, and when she did, her expression hovered somewhere between forced politeness and quiet irritation. Michael was always busy, working late, pacing the kitchen on tense phone calls, or retreating to the garage with a can of beer in hand. I asked him once if everything was all right, and he gave me a half smile that didn't reach his tired eyes. "We're just stretched thin, Mom. You know how it is. 2 kids, bills, work. It's a lot." I nodded. Yes, I did know how it was. I'd raised him through tougher years than this, with far less. But I didn't say that. I just kept smiling, kept offering to help in whatever small way I could. One morning, Eleanor stopped me in the hallway, her arms crossed. "Hey, do you mind not using the washing machine during the day? The electricity bill has been really high." I blinked, surprised. Of course. I didn't realize. I only did 1 load. "It's fine," she cut in, turning away before I could finish. Another time, she sighed audibly when I left the bathroom light on for too long. Then it was the heating, then the water. Every small gesture I made, folding the children's clothes, sweeping the kitchen floor, even buying groceries, seemed to be met with quiet judgment. And then came the bills. Michael brought it up casually, over dinner with the children half asleep at the table. "Mom," he began, avoiding my gaze, "I know this is a little awkward, but things are a bit tight right now. If you could maybe help with the mortgage, just until we get caught up, I'd really appreciate it." I looked at him, stunned. "Of course," I said almost automatically, a lifetime of wanting to help my son kicking in. "Just tell me what you need." That same week, I dipped into my savings, transferred enough to cover half the monthly payment, thinking it would be a one-time thing, a temporary bridge over a rough patch. But the next month, he asked again. And the month after that. It became expected, not requested. I didn't protest. I wanted to help my son and his family. That's what mothers did, wasn't it? But deep down, a disquieting feeling began to take root. It wasn't just the request itself, but the coldness with which it was received, the lack of any real gratitude. I began to notice things I'd overlooked before. Michael's phone buzzing late into the night, his quick switch to another tab on his laptop when I passed behind him at the kitchen counter, Eleanor's shopping bags from stores I knew weren't cheap despite her constant complaints about money. And always, the thick, unspoken tension that hung in the air like a humid summer day. Heavy, invisible, suffocating. One evening, I made a pot roast, the way Michael used to love it when he was a boy, all tender and savory with carrots and potatoes. I set the table, even folded the napkins the way I used to at home, a small attempt to create a sense of normalcy, of connection. But Eleanor didn't come downstairs until after we had eaten. She glanced at the empty plate I had saved for her, looked at me and said, "Next time, just ask. I don't really eat red meat." She didn't touch the food, just grabbed a protein bar from the pantry and went back upstairs. I sat at the table long after everyone had left, staring at the untouched roast, listening to the hum of the dishwasher in the background. I wasn't wanted here. I was useful, a wallet, a babysitter, a maid. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because I loved them, because a stubborn part of me still thought I could make it work, that underneath the surface, there was still the family I remembered. But the walls were already cracking, and I hadn't yet realized how little I was truly seen. The moment that would shatter everything was just around the corner, and it would come from the mouth of the one person who had always made me feel invisible. It happened on a Thursday. The children were particularly fractious that day. Too much screen time and not enough fresh air. Eleanor had barely emerged from the bedroom, and Michael had been glued to his laptop at the kitchen table since early morning, his brow furrowed in concentration. I spent most of the day refereeing squabbles, wiping up spilled juice, and folding laundry that wasn't mine. By dinner time, I was exhausted. I made a simple chicken casserole, the kind that feeds a crowd and stretches the leftovers. I set the table as always, called everyone down, and tried to pretend that this was normal, that I belonged. Eleanor sat across from me, scrolling through her phone between bites. Michael chewed in silence, his eyes fixed on the screen of his laptop propped beside his plate. The children bickered, poked at their food, and eventually got up before finishing. Trying to inject some normalcy into the strained atmosphere, I said gently, "You know, if we all sat together more often for meals, maybe Emily and Thomas would eat better." Eleanor didn't look up. Michael cleared his throat. "We're just a little overwhelmed, Mom, that's all." That was when Eleanor raised her head, her voice flat but with a sharp edge beneath the surface. "You're always making little comments, Margaret, like we don't know how to run our own house." I blinked, taken aback. "I didn't mean it like that. She cut me off, setting her fork down on her plate with a loud clink. "You do a lot of talking for someone who doesn't actually contribute enough to be making suggestions." The words landed like a slap. The air seemed to leave the room. Michael didn't say anything. He just looked down at his plate. I stared at them both, frozen, my hands trembling under the table. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because in that moment, a stark realization crashed over me, something I had been denying for weeks. I wasn't part of this family. I was a burden dressed up as a helper, a placeholder until they could breathe again, someone to use, not someone to honor. I got up without finishing my meal, took my plate to the sink, rinsed it in silence. My heart thudded heavily in my chest as I walked down the hallway to the makeshift room they had cleared for me. I sat on the edge of the air mattress and stared at the worn carpet for a long time. That night, sleep wouldn't come. My mind raced, replaying all the years I had held Michael through childhood storms, the nights I had gone hungry to make sure he had enough to eat, the countless sacrifices I had made without ever being asked. And now I wasn't contributing enough. After paying half their mortgage, cooking their meals, cleaning their house, loving their children, I still wasn't enough. By morning, something inside me had shifted. The silence at breakfast was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eleanor avoided my eyes. Michael acted as if nothing had happened. I didn't speak. I couldn't, not without crying, and I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. So I went back to the guest room, zipped up my suitcase, and began folding the few clothes I had taken from my real home, the one I should have never left. Then I saw it. Outside the bedroom door, propped against the hallway wall, my suitcase already packed, already waiting. As if they knew. As if this had been decided for me the moment Eleanor spoke those cruel words. A part of me cracked then, a deep, aching fissure. But another part, a deeper, more resilient part, hardened. I was done. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to lose more than just their housekeeper, their unpaid nanny, their emergency fund. They were about to lose the one person who would have done anything to protect them, and I would make sure they felt every inch of that loss. I didn't say goodbye. I wanted to Emily and Thomas at least, but I couldn't bring myself to wake them. They were innocent in all of this. They hadn't chosen to treat me like I was disposable. But I knew if I saw their sleepy eyes and their little hands reaching for one more hug, I wouldn't be able to leave. So, I didn't. I left a note on the kitchen counter, just one line written in the neat cursive I learned in Catholic school. "Thank you for having me." I carried my suitcase out the front door just after sunrise. No one noticed. No one stopped me. Michael didn't come down the stairs. Eleanor didn't peek from the bedroom window. The silence of that house confirmed everything I already knew. As I drove away, the road ahead blurred through unshed tears. Not tears of regret for leaving, but tears of regret for ever thinking I belonged. I pulled into my own driveway just past 8 o'clock. The house stood like a forgotten promise, a little sagging, a little dusty, but still mine, still waiting for me. I opened the front door and was hit with the familiar smell of old air and time, the kind of silence that echoed with memories. I walked from room to room, touching the furniture like it might disappear under my fingers. My wedding photo with Arthur was still on the fireplace mantel. Our bed was still made, the last sheets he slept on still neatly folded. My slippers were exactly where I'd left them. And suddenly, I felt foolish for leaving it, for thinking I could find comfort anywhere else. Before unpacking, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my banking app. I scrolled to the automatic transfers, the ones I'd set up to cover part of Michael and Eleanor's mortgage. I stared at them, my heart pounding, then I pressed cancel. Each one. Click, click, click. And then I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence settle around me like a familiar, comforting blanket. That afternoon, I got a text from Michael. "Hey, just wanted to check if you made it home okay." I didn't reply. 2 hours later, another message. "I know things got weird, but maybe we could talk soon?" Still, I said nothing. By nightfall, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. No apology, no acknowledgement of Eleanor's words, just concern that his safety net had walked out the door. I heated up a frozen meal and sat at my own table for the first time in months. I didn't eat much, but I swallowed every bite with a quiet sense of self-respect I hadn't tasted in years. They thought they could dismiss me like I was an old armchair, too worn to be useful. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They thought I would stay quiet. They had no idea what losing me would cost them. And I was only just beginning to realize the value they had so carelessly overlooked. The next time I heard from them, it wouldn't be a casual check-in. It would be a desperate cry for help. The drive back to my own place felt strange, like waking from a long, unsettling dream. The familiar curves of the road, the sight of my mailbox standing sentinel at the end of the driveway. They were all there, yet tinged with a sadness I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. My house stood waiting, a little quieter than I remembered, each room holding echoes of Arthur and the life we'd built within those walls. The first few days back were spent in a flurry of cleaning. Not because the house was truly dirty, but because I needed it. I needed to reclaim the space, to scrub away the lingering feeling of being an outsider, to remind myself that I existed beyond the confines of Michael and Eleanor's expectations. With the windows thrown open, letting in the crisp autumn air and the weak but welcome sunlight on the hardwood floors, I dusted Arthur's photographs, rearranged the books on the shelves, and even polished the silver tea set we'd received as a wedding gift. It was a ritual, a way of grounding myself back in my own life. But even with the familiar surroundings and the comforting routines, the silence was heavy. I missed the children, Emily and young Thomas. I missed their bright, inquisitive eyes, the way Emily would carefully explain her latest drawing, and the warm, unexpected hugs from little Thomas that always seemed to come at just the right moment. I didn't miss Eleanor's thinly veiled disdain or Michael's passive silence, but the absence of the grandchildren left a small ache in my heart. A few days later, I found myself browsing in a small toy shop downtown. Before I knew it, I had picked out 2 beautiful wooden puzzles, one with colorful farm animals for Emily and another with intricate gears for Thomas. I also chose a soft, knitted blanket in lavender for Emily and a sturdy blue one for Thomas, remembering how they always snuggled under throws on the sofa. I wrapped them carefully, adding a simple card with a note, "Thinking of you both. Love. Grandma." I mailed the package off the next day, a small gesture of love sent out into the silence. No word came from Michael. No text, no brief call, nothing. Eleanor, of course, remained silent. But I knew they'd received the package. The tracking information confirmed it. A week or so later, a neighbor mentioned seeing Eleanor at the local park with the children, and she'd described the blankets. That was enough for now, a small reassurance that my love hadn't gone completely unnoticed by the little ones. The silence from Michael and Eleanor stretched into weeks. I busied myself with jigsaw puzzles, losing myself in the satisfying click of interlocking pieces. I reread some of my favorite novels, the familiar stories offering a comforting escape. I took long walks around the neighborhood, the changing leaves painting the streets in vibrant hues of red and gold. I didn't cry, not outwardly, but every time I passed Arthur's favorite armchair or saw his worn gardening gloves hanging in the mudroom, a familiar pang of grief would tighten my chest. Then, one quiet evening, a strange unease settled over me. An instinct, a feeling deep in my gut, prompted me to check my bank account. I hadn't given it much thought since canceling the automatic mortgage payments. I logged in, and everything seemed in order. But then my eye caught an email alert, buried in my inbox from a couple of months prior, one I hadn't opened in the chaos of moving in with Michael and Eleanor. It was from my bank, a notification of a large withdrawal Michael had made. Money that hadn't gone to the mortgage. My heart pounded in my chest. I dug deeper, pulling up old statements, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through the transactions. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The numbers didn't add up. There were repeated charges for a company I didn't recognize, something with a vague, generic name. I copied it and pasted it into a search engine. A gambling website. I stared at the screen, stunned. Over a dozen charges, spread out over weeks, each one for hundreds of dollars, sometimes just days apart. All while I was under their roof. All while he was telling me how tight things were. While he let his wife treat me with such disdain. While I was paying his bills. It hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't just used me, he had lied to me. Not just by omission, but with full knowledge that he was funneling my hard-earned money into a bottomless pit. And worse, he hadn't even asked for help, not honestly. He had hidden it, buried it under a veneer of polite conversation and long, uncomfortable silences. That night, I sat in the living room, the lights off, the blue glow of the computer screen casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. I thought of every time I had believed I was helping him, supporting him, perhaps even saving him, and I realized with a sickening clarity that he had been letting me drown myself to keep his own head above water. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, the silence amplifying the cold, hard knot of betrayal in my chest. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never felt towards my own child: resentment. Not the sharp, angry kind, but the slow, acidic kind that eats away at your insides. The kind that comes from knowing your love and generosity had been weaponized against you. In that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same between us again. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. Not like the Margaret who used to make excuses, who would soften the edges, who would always look the other way. I felt sharper, colder, as if something inside me had finally snapped back into alignment after years of being out of joint. I didn't text Michael. I didn't confront him. What was the point? He would just deny it, minimize it, blame stress or Eleanor or life itself. I knew that dance well. I'd watched Arthur do it with his own secrets more times than I cared to count. But this wasn't about Arthur. This was about me. I opened a new savings account that day, one Michael couldn't touch. I transferred every penny I had left, closed the old account, and cancelled the debit card I had once given him, just in case. I deleted every automatic payment that had his name attached to it. Then, on a whim, I changed the locks on my front door. It felt dramatic, I knew, but it also felt right, like a small but significant ritual, sealing the space between the woman I used to be, the ever-giving, perhaps too trusting mother, and the woman I was slowly, resolutely becoming. The calls started about a week later. First, it was just Michael, casual check-ins. Just wanted to say, "Hi, Mom. Miss the kids." But I heard the strained edge in his voice, the underlying tension. He wasn't just calling to chat. Then the questions began, veiled at first. "Hey, did the bank call you? Something weird happened with my account. I think there's been a mistake with the mortgage. Did you maybe forget to?" I didn't answer. I let every call go to voicemail. The texts started stacking up like overdue bills. "Margaret, Eleanor says you changed your number? Are you okay? You've been acting strange. Can we just talk, please?" No, we couldn't. Not yet. I watched from a distance as the cracks in their carefully constructed little world deepened. Eleanor started posting fewer photos on social media. When she did, her smile looked tired, forced. The children's clothes looked a little more worn, the backgrounds more cluttered. The tone of her captions shifted, losing its usual breezy optimism. I could sense the money was drying up. Then came the real sign, the one that hit me with a jolt of something akin to vindication, though it wasn't a feeling I welcomed. A letter from the bank arrived, addressed to me by mistake, or perhaps not, given that I had once co-signed something years ago without fully understanding the implications. Pre-foreclosure notice. I stared at the word delinquent, as if it were written in fire. That same night, Michael called again. I didn't answer. He texted instead, "Mom, I know you're upset, but we need help. Just this once, please." No apology. No acknowledgement of the gambling, the lies, the betrayal. Just desperation. And I'll admit it, a small, foolish part of me ached to fix it, to make everything right, to be the mother who swoops in and saves the day, who earns back her worth through sacrifice. But that part of me was fading, starved by years of one-sided giving. Instead, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to Michael, not to Eleanor, but to myself. I listed everything I had given, every bill I'd paid, every favor I'd done, every ride, every meal, every sacrifice. Then, beneath it, I wrote, "And still it wasn't enough." That sentence stared back at me like a final verdict. It was the truth. And finally, I was done trying to rewrite it. They were about to learn what life looked like without me, and I was about to learn what life looked like when I chose myself first. I disappeared. Not physically. I was still in my home, still walking the same streets, still buying my groceries at the same corner store. But emotionally, digitally, spiritually, I vanished. I shut down my Facebook account, blocked Michael's number, changed my email address, and turned off notifications for everything. I needed silence. Not the heavy, painful silence I had lived with since Arthur died, but a new kind of silence, clean and uncluttered, the kind that makes space for something better. I started small. A walk every morning, just 20 minutes through my familiar neighborhood, past the same mailboxes, barking dogs, and neatly trimmed hedges I'd seen 1,000 times before. But now, I saw them with different eyes. The air felt colder, crisper, as if it held more truth. It cut through the fog of denial I'd been living in. Then, I signed up for therapy. Not because I was broken, though perhaps a part of me was, but because I needed someone to talk to who wouldn't try to manipulate me, guilt me, or demand anything from me. I cried through the first 3 sessions, tears I hadn't shed in front of another human being in years. I told her everything, about Arthur's quiet selfishness, about Michael's growing distance, about Eleanor's barely concealed disdain, about the time I'd overheard Eleanor mocking my clothes to a friend on speakerphone, about the countless meals they hadn't thanked me for, about the way Michael used to call me Mom when he needed something and Margaret when he didn't want to talk, about how I'd paid for his childhood, his college, his first car, his wedding suit, and now, unknowingly, his gambling addiction, all while being told I wasn't enough. My therapist didn't say much, but she looked at me, really looked at me, and somehow, that was everything. Next, I pulled my old sewing machine out of the attic. I hadn't touched it since before Arthur got sick, back when I used to make costumes for school plays, Halloween outfits for Michael, and pillows for the church bazaar. I dusted it off, oiled the joints, and started stitching again. At first, it was just mending old towels and worn shirts. But soon, I was making tote bags, aprons, and custom baby blankets. I set up an online store, nothing big or flashy, just mine. And people bought them. Strangers sent me thank you messages, asked for more, paid full price, told me my stitching reminded them of their own grandmothers. For the first time in years, I was valued, not as a mother, not as a helper, not as a wallet, but as me. One afternoon, I opened a new journal, the pages crisp and untouched. I wrote across the first line in thick black ink, "I am not a burden. I am not invisible. I am not disposable." And beneath that, "I am a woman who deserves peace." It became my mantra. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I didn't need to. Because slowly, steadily, I was becoming someone I hadn't been in a very long time. Not just someone who survived, but someone who thrived. And meanwhile, the world I'd left behind was starting to crack. I still didn't hear from Michael directly for over 3 weeks. Not a word. No texts, no calls, no last-ditch apologies. The silence was strange at first, eerie even, but not painful, just quiet. Like the ringing in your ears after a fire alarm stops. You don't realize how loud it was until it's gone. But then, slowly signs of their unraveling began to surface, subtle at first, like smoke seeping under a closed door. Eleanor's social media changed. The curated photos of the children in matching outfits, the latte art, the new home decor, all the bright filters and toothy smiles, became fewer and farther between. The captions grew shorter, the smiles disappeared, and then, nothing. I checked once a week, just to see. Call it curiosity, call it concern. I told myself it wasn't spite. I just needed to know how far the echo of my absence had carried. One afternoon, while scrolling through the local neighborhood app, I saw a listing, gently used sectional sofa, must pick up, urgent. It was their couch. I recognized the throw pillows. A week later, another post, brand name handbags for sale, DM for details. Then came the car. Eleanor's SUV, the one she refused to let anyone else drive, was gone from their driveway in the background of a neighbor's photo. In its place, a dented, older sedan. Their carefully constructed image was fading, the polished veneer stripped away. The next time I went into town, I saw Michael at the grocery store. Alone. He didn't see me, or maybe he pretended not to. He was wearing the same faded flannel shirt I'd mended a tear in last year. His cart held generic cereal, frozen pizza, baby wipes. No steaks, no wine, no organic anything. He looked tired, pale, hollow. I watched him from behind a display of canned soup, and for one fragile second, something in me wanted to walk up to him, say hello, ask about the children, offer to help. But then Eleanor's voice, crisp and cutting, echoed in my mind. You don't contribute enough to be making suggestions. So, I let him pass. That night, I cooked myself a real meal. Not frozen, not microwaved. I lit a candle, poured a glass of wine, and set the table with my good china, just for me. The house was warm, safe, peaceful. And then, on Christmas Eve, a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the window. No car in the driveway. A delivery box sat on my porch, large and wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside were 2 smaller packages, one addressed to Grandma and the other to Mimi. The nickname young Thomas had started calling me when he was still learning to speak. My breath caught in my throat. Inside were the same wooden puzzles I had sent weeks ago, carefully rewrapped. But now, they had been decorated with colorful stickers and glitter. One of them had a note attached, written in big, childish handwriting. We miss you, Mimi. Merry Christmas. Come back soon. I sat down on the floor and wept. Not for Michael, not for Eleanor, but for the children, for what they were caught in, for what they didn't understand. I wanted to run to them, hold them, tell them none of this was their fault. But instead, I walked to the hallway closet, pulled out 2 new winter coats I had bought on clearance and never mailed, and began to pack another box. I filled it with love disguised as essentials. Gloves, warm socks, small, comforting toys, and another note. A grandma's love doesn't need permission. It's always yours. I dropped it at the post office the next morning. No return address, no expectation, just love with boundaries. Because they had to learn. I wouldn't disappear, but I also wouldn't be their foundation anymore. They would have to rebuild it themselves. Christmas came and went in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Quiet, still, mine. I decorated the small tree alone, hung Arthur's favorite ornament near the top, and lit a single candle by his photo on the mantelpiece. I didn't cook a feast, just baked my mother's cinnamon bread, the one she used to make on snowy mornings, letting the scent fill the house with comforting memories. There was no shouting, no chaos, no scrambling to impress guests who didn't truly care. There was only peace. But even peace has its shadows. I missed the children, missed the sound of their laughter echoing through the house, the way Emily would curl up beside me on the sofa like a little cat, the way Thomas would try to say words too big for his mouth. I wondered what kind of Christmas they were having. The answer came a few days later, wrapped in Eleanor's continued social media silence and one terse text from Michael. "Hope you had a good holiday, Mom." "No, we missed you." "No, the kids asked about you." Just that one cold sentence. But I already knew what kind of holiday they'd had. You could see it in the absences. No Christmas photos, no matching pajamas, no decorated tree in the background. And then I saw it. A local classified post on the day after Christmas. Urgent. Looking for part-time babysitting, flexible hours, must be reliable, background check required. The poster was Eleanor. My heart squeezed and swelled at the same time. They needed help. Not a handout, not anymore. They needed support, structure, stability, things I had once provided like clockwork, like breath, without ever being thanked. I could have called. I could have reached out. But I didn't. Instead, I did something else. I sent another package to the children. This one carefully thought out. Inside were warm winter coats, handmade scarves I'd knitted myself, new books, and small wooden toys. But also something extra, 2 framed photos. One of me with Emily, another with Thomas, taken the last time we had made cookies together. The smiles in those photos were real, the joy was whole. And then, one final envelope, addressed to Michael and Eleanor. Inside was a simple card. On the front, a watercolor painting of a tree losing its leaves. On the inside, handwritten in pen, "Love isn't alone. Respect isn't optional. And help isn't forever." No signature. No threats. Just the truth, laid bare. Days passed. Then a week. Then one afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a box on my porch. No return label. Inside, wrapped in brown paper and Scotch tape, were the 2 photo frames I had sent. But the coats and books were gone. And on the back of the card I had sent, a new line had been added in Michael's handwriting. "We understand. We'll figure it out." I stood there for a long time, holding the card, my heart thudding softly. He was starting to get it. Not fully, not yet. But the cracks were turning into reflection. The next step would be painful, for him, for her, for the children. But I wouldn't interfere. Sometimes, love means stepping back far enough for them to fall, so they finally learn how to stand on their own. The call came on a Tuesday evening. I was folding laundry, the mundane rhythm of the task a quiet counterpoint to the stillness that had settled in my house. My phone buzzed on the counter. I almost didn't answer, but something, a faint tug of, well, perhaps not hope, but a weary sort of curiosity, made me pick it up. It was Michael. His voice was raw, stripped bare of its usual defensiveness. "Mom," he said, the word catching in his throat. "Please. I need to see you." There was no bitterness in his tone, no attempt at guilt. Just a stark vulnerability I hadn't heard in years, not since he was a little boy with a scraped knee. I didn't say yes immediately, didn't offer any easy comfort. "I'll be home tomorrow afternoon, Michael," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "If you want to stop by around 2. The next day, I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel drive. Peeking through the curtains, I saw his car, not Eleanor's familiar SUV, but a compact sedan that looked borrowed or bought cheap. He walked up the steps slowly, his shoulders slumped as if carrying a weight heavier than his years. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. He'd lost more weight, his eyes were shadowed and sunken, his cheeks pale. The confident slouch he'd adopted sometime after marrying Eleanor was gone, replaced by a raw, almost childlike uncertainty. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped aside. He sat on the edge of the sofa, as if unsure it would hold him, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his knuckles white. I messed up, Mom, he said, his gaze fixed on the worn rug. You don't need to say it, Michael, I replied, my voice quiet but firm. I already know. I stayed silent, letting him gather his thoughts. He looked around my living room, his eyes lingering on the familiar objects. Arthur's worn armchair, the stack of books on the coffee table, the small candle still burning on the mantelpiece beside Arthur's photograph. I didn't realize how peaceful it was here, he said softly. Still, I didn't speak, just waited. And then, the dam broke. I'm in trouble, Mom, he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. I think I'm addicted to online betting. I tried to stop, I swear I did, but every time I felt overwhelmed, I'd just pick up the phone. He swallowed hard. Eleanor, she doesn't understand. She just wants the money back. That's all she ever talks about. He paused, choked on his words. I ruined everything. The house is behind on payments. The kids, they ask why there's no heat some nights. Eleanor's talking about moving back in with her mother. I don't know what to do. And then came the question I had been dreading, the one I knew was inevitable. Can you help us, Mom? Just this once. We just need a little push. I swear I'll pay you back. I looked at him, really looked at him. This was my child, my baby boy, the one I had once rocked through fevers and childhood fears, now drowning in choices he had made. And yet, I stood slowly, walked to the front door, opened it, and said softly but firmly, "Not today, Michael." He froze, blinking at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "Mom." "I'm not saying never," I clarified, my voice still gentle but unwavering. "But not today. Not until you understand what it cost me to sit in this room alone while you let someone else humiliate me in yours." He tried to speak, a jumble of words forming on his lips, but I raised a hand, stopping him. "I loved you through every stage of your life, Michael. I sacrificed without asking. I gave until I felt like I was disappearing. And you watched it happen. You let it happen. So now, you'll have to live in the silence you created." A single tear tracked down his pale cheek. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, and for the first time in a long time, I believed him. But belief wasn't enough to erase the past. He left 10 minutes later. Didn't slam the door, didn't stomp down the steps. Just walked slowly to his borrowed car, like a man learning to carry the weight of his own mistakes. That night I cried, but not for him. I cried for the mother I used to be, the one who thought love meant endless forgiveness. That woman was gone, and in her place stood someone new, someone ready to set the terms. 3 weeks passed. No calls, no texts, just silence. But this time, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. A quiet between storms, a space for him to sit with himself, and for me to decide what I needed. Then, one morning, just as I was about to head to the post office, there was a knock. I opened the door, and there he was. Michael. His hair was longer, his beard untrimmed, but his eyes, they were different. Not desperate, not manipulative, just tired, honest. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more subdued. I nodded. He sat on the sofa again, but not like a stranger this time, more like a man tentatively asking for solid ground beneath him. I started going to meetings, Mom," he said, his gaze fixed on his hands. "Gamblers Anonymous. Every Tuesday and Saturday." I said nothing, just listened. "I sold the SUV," he continued, his voice gaining a little strength. "Cancelled the credit cards. Got a job doing deliveries at night. It's not much, but it's something. I'm trying, Mom, that I really am." I waited. I knew there was more. We're behind 2 months on the mortgage," he admitted, the vulnerability returning to his eyes. "Eleanor, she's angry all the time. The kids hear everything. I don't want to lose them." He looked up at me, his expression raw. "I need help, Mom. But this time, I'm not just asking for money. I need structure. I need you to teach me how to be responsible, how to stop depending on everyone else. I swallowed hard. This was the moment, the crossroads. I stood up, went into the kitchen, and returned with a folder. Inside was a payment agreement, a simple budget plan I had sketched out, a printed list of local rehabilitation clinics, and a separation checklist I had found online. He opened it slowly, his eyes widening as he took in the contents. "What's this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "My terms," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "I'll pay the past due amount on the mortgage, just enough to keep the house from being taken. One time. That's it. From here on out, you're in control of your own money. I'll help guide you if you show up. But if you miss one therapy session, one group meeting, if I catch one charge on your account from a betting site..." He cut me off, his eyes pleading. "Mom, I won't. If you want this help, Michael," I continued, unwavering, "you also separate your finances from Eleanor completely. No joint accounts, no shared cards. You handle your side, she handles hers." He hesitated, his brow furrowed. That's not going to go over well," he muttered. "That's your call, Michael," I said gently. "But if you stay tangled in her chaos, I'm out." His eyes darted back to the folder, the agreement, the checklist. His hands trembled slightly, and then he nodded. "Okay." And just like that, I saw something shift in him. Not forgiveness, not resolution, but accountability. We shook hands. He signed the papers. We set weekly check-in times. My rules, my timing. And then he stood to leave. At the door, he turned back to me, his gaze steady. I never realized how much I leaned on you until you stepped away," he admitted, his voice thick with a newfound understanding. I smiled faintly. "That's the thing about leaning, Michael," I said softly. "It works until the person holding you up finally steps aside." He left in silence. I locked the door behind him, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had won something. Not by saving someone else, but by saving myself. One chapter closed, but there was still one final lesson to be learned. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, not yet, but quieter. The air in my house was still, the tension that had lingered for so long finally dissipating. Brian, to my surprise, kept his word. He showed up for his meetings. He stuck to the budget plan, slowly, painstakingly starting to untangle himself from the mess he had created. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. I could see the strain in his eyes, the way his hands still trembled when he talked about finances. He wanted to trust again, but trust was a currency he had spent recklessly. Eleanor, on the other hand, remained a distant figure. Her social media presence stayed dormant. When she came by to drop off the children for their scheduled visits with me, the tension between her and Michael was palpable. Every small thing seemed to set her off. The way he loaded the dishwasher, the shoes he left in the hallway. She would snap at him, then retreat into her phone, a wall of silence between them. The most telling moment came when Michael finally told her about his decision to separate their finances. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting match. Just a quiet, tired conversation at my kitchen table after he dropped off the kids. "I can't do this anymore, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with a weariness I hadn't heard before. "I can't keep depending on you to solve everything. I have to do this myself. For me. For the kids." She didn't say anything for a long time, just stared out the window. Then finally she spoke, her tone softer than I had ever heard it. It wasn't harsh or cruel, just small. "You're right, Michael," she said quietly. "I've been waiting for you to fix it all. I thought we could just keep going, but I don't know if I can do it anymore either." They didn't get divorced then, but there was a shift in the air. A sense of something ending, something new trying to begin. Michael looked at her not with resentment, but with a weary acceptance. He had done what I had asked. He had made the choice to stand on his own 2 feet. It was hard, but it was happening. And I didn't offer my help. I didn't offer a shoulder to cry on. I didn't step in. I let them figure it out. A week later, I received a call from Michael. It was late, around 10. I had just finished a small sewing project for my online store and was tidying up the kitchen when my phone rang. It wasn't the hesitant text I had come to expect. It wasn't a desperate plea. It was just him. "Mom," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I've been thinking. I want to move out." I paused, setting the dish I was washing back in the sink. "Are you sure, Michael?" "Yeah," he said, the conviction in his voice clear. "It's time. I can't keep living under that roof like I'm just a guest. I need my own place. I need to be able to take care of my kids the right way." He took a deep breath. "It's going to be hard, but I can do it. I want to do it." A wave of emotion washed over me, a mixture of relief and a quiet, burgeoning pride. "You're right, Michael," I said, my voice tight but calm. "You can do it. I know you can." I didn't tell him what I was thinking, that this was the moment, the first real step toward the future I had been waiting for. Not for me, not for them, but for him. His future. His stability. We ended the call with a promise, not to each other, but to ourselves. He was going to make it. A few days later, I saw him again. He was standing by his car outside a small duplex a few blocks from my house. He looked different. Not just physically, though he had gained a little weight and looked cleaner, but something else had changed. There was a quiet strength about him. He had done what I never thought he could. He didn't ask for help this time. Instead, he held out a set of keys. Not in a boastful way, not like a man who had won a prize, but like a man who had earned something precious. "Mom," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I did it. I paid for this place with my own money. And I'll pay the bills. I'll be a father, a husband, and a son. I'll do it my way. No more excuses." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "I'm proud of you, Michael," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I wouldn't have done it without you," he admitted, his voice thick with gratitude. "But you didn't just give me the money, Mom. You gave me the space to find myself again. And that was enough." I hugged him tightly, the warmth of the embrace not coming from pity or regret, but from a place of understanding. We had both fought this battle for so long, side by side but never truly together. Now, we were both standing on our own 2 feet. And I realized in that moment that I didn't need to save him anymore. He had saved himself. I watched him drive away, his small car disappearing down the street, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Not just for me, but for him, for all of us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace.